Over the Moon, the podcast where I talk to you about all things space-related, from theories of creation to new rocket designs. Today we will be talking about the N-1 Soviet Union moon rocket. The N-1 moon rocket was the Russians' own rocket that was attempted to land on the moon. During the 60s, and even before then, Russia and America were competing over everything. They had many races such as the nuclear race, but the most recent was the space race. As I've already said before, the Apollo mission was heavily political. It was going to be how they win against the Russians, by sending the first man to the moon, which was strongly helped by the fact that they captured Werner von Braun. They had Werner von Braun and all of his team. The N-1 was originally just going to be a super heavy booster for multi-purpose human flight use. It was later signed off to become the main booster of the N-1 moon rocket. The N-1 moon rocket was very large and close to the size of the Saturn V. So, going back in time to when the N-1 was originally chosen as a mission would take us back to December 1959, when the Design Bureau proposed 3 different rockets to the Soviet military, with the largest being the N-1. Or in Russian, the H-1, because, we use different languages. It's very complicated, you might not understand it. That was a joke. It was going to be used for construction of a Soviet space station and later crewed flybys of both Venus and Mars. The N-1 was going to use the same lunar rendezvous system that the Apollo program used, where they would fly it up and then disconnect and reconnect and then fly it to the moon. The N-1 launch vehicle was going to have 3 different stages, which would carry a lunar payload into lower Earth orbit, along with 2 cosmonauts. The lunar payload would be one stage with enough delta V to carry the cosmonauts into a lunar insertion, along with another stage for mid-course corrections, lunar orbit insertion, and the first part of the descent to the lunar surface. The version of the N-1, the N-1L3, was underfunded and rushed, with the development starting 4 years after the Saturn V's development. The N-1, which caused them to have to rush it to try and beat the Americans, and ended up causing them to fail. The N-1 itself launched 4 times, and every launch failed. And the last one caused the largest non-nuclear man-made explosion. In 1974, the N-1 program was suspended, and that's incorrect. In 1972, I apologize, there was a typo. The N-1 program was suspended, and in 1974, it was cancelled. The N-1 was going to carry 3 cosmonauts to the moon. Cosmonauts are Russian astronauts. It's a hierarchy where they got to a different level of space, so they call them differently. So 2 of the cosmonauts would stay in lunar orbit, while a single cosmonaut would transfer outside the rocket rather than through a docking port inside the rocket, and then would land on the lunar surface, while the Saturn V had 2 people landing on the surface and 1 staying in lunar orbit, with the way they transferred the crew from the Apollo command pod and the lunar lander being through docking ports. So, in conclusion, the N-1 was a rushed program, and really was mostly just made to beat the Americans to the moon, while the Saturn V was a well-thought-out program that succeeded, mostly in part because they defeated the Nazis and they all ran over to the Americans. Kármán line. What's that? For this section of the What's That section, we will be discussing the Kármán line. The Kármán line is the most commonly agreed upon line between the Earth's atmosphere and space. It's 100 kilometers or 622 meters straight up. The Kármán line is named after Theodor von Kármán, who was a Hungarian engineer and a physicist of the aeronautics variety, so like planes. What he found out was above this line, 100 kilometers or 62 miles in altitude, the atmosphere was too thin to support plane flight because they'd have to go super fast. And there was no oxygen above here, so their engines, which would usually require air, wouldn't work. In conclusion, the Kármán line is the line where space starts and is on Earth 100 kilometers or 62 miles in altitude and varying between different planets. If you enjoyed this episode of Over the Moon, then hit like and subscribe, and stay tuned for next Sunday when I talk about Voyager, the mission to the planets of our solar system and beyond. Bye.